So I wanted to speak a bit about pay gaps, but I did want to speak as well about how they connect to other structural and systemic inequalities, obviously with reference to the education sector. Now, we know due to gender pay gap reporting that there are some really big pay gaps in education. I've picked out some highlights for you. Furness College has a median gender pay gap of 38.5%. Loughborough University has a median pay gap of 35.7%. This has actually gotten worse since 2017. And just before I logged onto this call, I got news that in further education, the gender pay gap has increased by 3%. And in higher education, for any of you who are connected with HE, universities are often encouraged to engage with something called Athena Swan, which is an initiative to close gender pay gaps in universities. But as of yet, we've seen no correlation between the efforts put into Athena Swan and actually improving gender pay. Now, I think before I sort of get onto some of the broader issues, it's probably worth saying that the sector is making some progress on this issue, but it's very slow. It's also based very much on local work by unions. And I think before I kind of move on to discussing the broader issues and how gender connects with other systemic and structural inequalities, I do just want to flag what has been a landmark deal at the University of Bristol this year, which was negotiated by the UCU branch there. So it was the culmination of 18 months worth of work at Bristol when the union branch there on March 2018 submitted a claim to tackle gender pay at the university. Now, at that moment in time, the pay gap at Bristol was 13.6%, which is actually just below the national average in UKHE of 15.1%. The campaign that they launched in Bristol was a really interesting one because what they sought to do was actually map out the institution, figure out who within the institution was on committees that could really push forward a gender pay claim. And they started ways of reaching out to them that weren't necessarily through traditional trade union methods, such as public meetings or whatever. So they would hold different types of events and get different communities there. And by the end of this process, they'd really managed to create a culture and an atmosphere in the university where addressing gender pay wasn't an option, or not addressing a gender pay wasn't an option. But they also knew that they didn't want to address it in a sort of a superficial way that just sort of benefited the university's press team. So after a lot of local negotiation, they have come up with a claim which is increasing opportunities for progression for women, greater opportunity to work flexibly or job share, funding for a pilot scheme to allow research staff to continue working at the university between grants, which is when a lot of people in HE lose their work, training for all staff involved in the recruitment and promotion process, and particularly because a lot of women in universities get stuck in professional service and administrative jobs, they were looking at extending the career path for those sorts of jobs as well. So I just want to flag this as a way that when a union can find a way to kind of break out of a sort of its normal bubble of campaigning to a broader community of people, it can push forward claims that benefit obviously everyone in that institution, not just union members. With that said, there are broader problems that I'm, from listening in the reports back that you've just given, definitely map onto higher education. Because one of the main issues that our union has been in disputing over this year is not just gender pay gaps, but equality pay gaps in general, and how they map on to other employment practices within the education sector, particularly precarious and casualised employment. And also the extent to which workloads are intensified. And I think people have already said in this meeting that disproportionately women pick up emotional labour in universities as opposed to their male counterparts. So I just want to kind of broaden this discussion out now to talk about other pay gaps, but also how they are facilitated by other types of employment. So in education, and particularly higher education, who gets a foot in the door, whose face fits, who gets a proper contract, who can stay on through casualised contract is ultimately another cause of big pay gaps. And that's why we have to really look intersectionally at the cause of pay gaps in education, because what we know from research that UCU has conducted is if you're a woman, a Black, Asian, or minority ethnic member of staff, you are paid less. You're also much more likely, and in some cases twice as likely, to be on a fixed term contract, an hourly paid, or a 0-hour contract. Precarity, low pay, and different forms of institutional discrimination, they all compound one another. So just some sort of data from higher education here for you. Women are more likely to be on a fixed term contract than men. That's 36% as opposed to 32%. They're also more likely to be on an hourly paid contract. That's 15% compared to 12% for male counterparts. However, and this is what I've just alluded to, this figure leaps to 42% for BAME academic staff. 24% of academic white men are on a fixed term contract. The figure is 45% for Asian women, and that's the highest group by gender and race. And this has really been what our disputes this year for UCU have primarily been about saying that we have to reduce casualisation and precarity because we have big equality pay gaps, and the way in which they intersect together obviously make this disproportionately worse for certain groups, and certainly is not good for building academic capacity in the sector that is representative of the sort of sector that we want to see. And I think this does map onto some of the issues that you were reporting back from when I joined your call, because UCU's also been doing some interesting research at the other end of the career ladder. So not just looking at precarious and insecure employment and who manages to make it into the academy, but also the staying power of senior professors, and in particular Black women professors in higher education, and the absolutely scandalously low levels of Black women professors in the UK. We were involved in a portrait piece of research earlier this year, which you could probably, if you put staying power into the Guardian, I think it comes up. So I think from us as a perspective as a union, we really need to see, and I think the Conservative Party manifesto did sort of gesture towards equal pay audits could be broadened out to include race pay. These are really important because obviously the data help. 1 minute left, I can do that. The data helps us put a figure on this and really campaign on it. But what we've learned as a union is that really to move forward on this, we need to burst it into a broader conversation. We need to outline and really find a clear way of communicating what that kind of heteropatriarchal normative employment relationship, how certain people get rewarded. And yeah, that this brings in more than just issues of race and gender, as people have already said, of how people are valued, how people are given legitimacy in an organisation, because that's what we're going to really need to broaden it out and have a kind of a cultural shift to push this forward.